All right, we should be live. Here we go. All right, I've got the Nikon Z6. This is a Z6. You can't tell them apart. That's the only thing. Z6 and Z7 right here. So thanks for joining. We're going to make this kind of interesting. So you can talk about anything. I don't really care, but I have these two new cameras and I have a bunch of these brand new lenses, 50mm f1.8, 35mm 1.8. So I figured, hey, this is a good chance to talk about these. I've been using the Z7 for a couple of weeks now, and the Z6 just came in yesterday. So I've been shooting with it just for a day. I took a bunch of low light tests. Actually, I should have a link to be able to see the low light results. In the description of this video, you can download raw files and the JPEG files and then a video file showing the low light results from this. And I'll kind of talk about them a little bit too. But yeah, feel free to hit me up in the comments. I should be following all of you guys here. There's a little bit of a delay. So let's see how you guys are doing in here. Awesome. All right, so a lot of questions are between these two cameras, actually. I'm a little bit surprised given that there's a very heavy price difference between these two cameras. So you would think that, hey, if you're in the market for a $2,000 camera, it's a $3,500 camera here. So pretty big price difference, but a lot of you guys are interested in the differences between the two. I did do a low light comparison between these. Unfortunately, so far, I cannot open raw files for the Z6. If any of you guys know a way of opening the raw files right now, I know that there is no raw support in Adobe or anything like that. I downloaded Nikon stuff as well. The Z7 is supported, but the Z6 is not. So I'm not really able to give a good comparison between them. I can kind of analyze them separately, and I would say that both of them are absolutely excellent. So another big question is going to be between the autofocus systems between the two. All right, so someone asked about pixel binning, and that is going to matter mostly in the Z7. And I've kind of talked about this a little bit in the preview of the two cameras. The Z6 is going to be a little bit better suited for video shooters. So hey, feel free to let me know on the quality as well. Like, I have a mic here, hopefully that's picking everything up all right. If you need volume up, volume down, anything like that, hopefully everything is okay with that. And yep. All right, so I can probably hear it here. Okay, I think the audio is going well. So yeah, pixel binning. If you have the Z7, the big issue is that we have this 45 megapixel sensor, and even for 4K video, you need like 8 megapixels of resolution. So how do we get these 45 megapixels into this 8 megapixel final video image? And how they do that usually is doing something called line skipping or pixel binning. So you're losing a bunch of the resolution that the sensor can give you in order to downscale that there. Now, there are a couple cameras that can actually take that full resolution file and downsample it down. Cameras like the, I don't have it here, the A7 III here, but the A7R3 my wife Sally has right now. So can't show you that one. But on that camera, you do see that Sony is actually able to actually take a very large resolution file and scale that down without using pixel binning, so you're going to get a little bit better quality on that one. So on the Z7, what that means is that the Z7 cannot record all of the resolution at full 4K. So what you're going to either need to do is it's going to record the full frame sensor, so it's going to use pixel binning, which will mean a little loss in detail, or you can shoot in the crop mode. So it's an APS-C crop mode, and that will allow the full pixel readout. So that would be the highest quality way to go. Unfortunately, you're going to use a little bit less of the sensor, so you're probably not going to see the kind of low light results you could see if you were using the full resolution of a sensor, and then obviously you have to deal with the new focal length. So that is kind of a negative out there. So the Z6, I don't think it's officially out right now. We're doing some testing with Nikon this week, so it should be a lot of fun. There's a big event going on. You're going to see a lot of people out there as well. This is public information. I asked them. So the Z6s have been sent out now to a couple of people, and these should be production samples and everything like that. along with the lenses, including this 50mm 1.8. So this is a brand new lens right here. I don't think anyone has had these any results with these. So I've been shooting with this all day long. So yeah, you can't buy them quite yet. All right, so yeah. Here's an interesting question right here. Why did Nikon invest so heavily in creating this large mount but has slow f1.8 lenses? This is a very interesting question. I don't get this at all. When Canon released their camera, they released kind of a dumbed down version of the camera, and we hope that there's kind of a pro model that might be upwards of $3,000, $3,500. Nikon put out two cameras, including this $3,500 pro model. I don't know, but in reality, we have more of a intermediate series of lenses with a 24-70 f4 and then 1.8 prime lenses. So I don't really understand that. While Canon gave us these, where's my Canon? So Canon gave us this 50mm 1.2. It's like over $2,000, super expensive, super heavy, but this thing is just so good quality. It's absolutely amazing to shoot with. You would think that if you were going with this pro model and showing off this brand new lens mount, you would do something just a little bit better on there. AF on the Z6 faster than the Z7. I don't know yet. Theoretically, the Z7 has more points. That would usually help it with tracking and figuring out which way to go. However, these cameras also have smaller pixels on the Z7 that might impact low light quality or low light autofocus a little bit. But right now I'm not seeing any big difference, but I haven't done any side-by-side testing on that. How does it compare to the A7 III, A7R III? Yeah, that's going to be tough to tell. Autofocus is just, it's not been quite there yet for me. It is good. It is way better than any Nikon camera in the past. If you think about, Nikon had no decent autofocus system in live view on any of their cameras, and they had to develop this from scratch for a first generation Nikon autofocus system with on-sensor phase detection. It is great. But does it quite compete with this, third generation of Sony's cameras? No, not quite. It's really more like the A7R II from last year. That's kind of what it's been for me so far, which is that it's good, but not amazing. Shooting sports with it or getting super accurate results. Plus, you don't have things like eye autofocus. So it's really more like what Sony's done in their second generation cameras, which in one way of thinking about it is good. To your first iteration is better than some on their second iteration, but it still is not going to quite compete with the A7R III on that. Let's see. If you were a Nikon shooter, would you invest in this system? I think right now I would wait for lenses. I don't see a huge reason to buy this until there are lenses. I'm not a huge fan. These lenses are fine, but if you're going to spend, especially if you're looking for the Z7, I just don't feel like the lenses quite match up to the body, and I'm not a huge fan of adapters. The good thing I would say is you are getting some really nice advantages that you don't get with the DSLR. So you do have in-body image stabilization. You have a really good electronic viewfinder. You have a smaller body than like a D850, but still incredibly weather sealed. So there are some advantages to this over a D850, but there are some disadvantages as well, and we'll kind of talk about that a little bit. Would the Z6 complement the D850 better than the Z7? And these cameras are very, very similar. The big difference between them is going to be video and then that high resolution sensor. So really it just depends on what you want. If you already have a D850, I can't think of a huge reason to get the Z7 unless you're shooting it primarily when you go to travel work. You might leave your D850 at home and then want to shoot your landscapes on the Z7. But other than that, as a complement second camera, I mean, 24 megapixels is really plenty for that. GFX 50R, I just actually used that camera at Photo Plus. I'm going to release a video on that. It's a really interesting camera. The image quality is great on those cameras, but gosh, it's so slow, and just the ergonomics on it are just not great. So I'm just so torn on those medium format cameras. If they were able to deliver performance similar to these with just that larger sensor, that would be amazing, but they're so slow. and I really don't think it's worth it on the image quality side for most people. I got a lot of comments on here, so kind of bear with me. Any thoughts on we did that one Z6? Let's see. Your stream is topping out at 480p, by the way. That's not cool. I wonder why that is. I don't know if I can change that now for sure. Yeah, it should be 1080p. Huh. That's kind of weird. Yeah, I hope that's not the case for you guys. Let me see if I can tell right here on my computer. Oh man, why is that? That sucks. All right, I'm really sorry about that if that is topping out at crazy resolutions like that. There is no reason this should be below that. Let me see if I can like prioritize the Wi-Fi on this thing. Maybe I'm getting slow Wi-Fi. All right, let's see what else we got while I'm doing this. Does it seem like a big difference between the 6 and the 7 number of autofocus points? I mean, right now I'm not seeing a huge difference. I used the Z7 and it was not perfect for me. And all right, I can prioritize this device right here, and maybe this will help. Okay, so yeah, I'm not seeing a huge difference between the two. D750 and Z6, honestly right now, guys, I think that the D750, it's not a camera I would buy. It really is something that we should have seen updated, I feel like a while ago, and it has not been updated. Why is it not letting me prioritize this? It still is not updated, and I don't know why it's not been updated, but it absolutely should be. And because of that, it just, all right, here it is. Android device, save. Let's see if that does it right there. All right, so yeah, the D750 is just a little old, and the Z6 basically beats it in so many areas. I also feel like I don't feel like these bodies eliminate the very real threat of people migrating to Sony. In some ways they do. This is actually kind of filling a lot of the gaps that Nikon is looking for. It's giving you some advantages of the mirrorless camera. It's not quite as powerful as what the Sony has been doing, but if you're shooting Nikon and you have all their lenses already, man, the switch to Sony can be difficult. And if you're used to their colors and their profiles, it can be a tough one. However, if you have something like a D7000 and you're going to have to buy brand new lenses anyway because you're going to full frame, then yeah, maybe this isn't quite enough to keep people from migrating to Sony. Z6 versus D750, kind of answered that one. If you're a serious Nikon video shooter, the internal 10-bit is interesting. I don't think you shoot 10-bit internally. I think it's only 10-bit to an external recorder, which I'm going to be using it with the Ninja 5 or V? I don't know. The Ninja 5, which is their brand new recorder, and that will record 10-bit internally in 4K. So I will be using it with that. But yeah, it's internal 8-bit and then external 10-bit, which is about what I would expect and about what best that any camera is doing right now, other than small sensor cameras like a GH5. So that's absolutely fine for most people. Does it seem like a big difference between the 6 and the 7? So yeah, most of those we've kind of talked about. Canon 50mm f1.8. So this is a lot better quality than like a Canon 50mm f1.8 right here. It's a metal body. It feels pretty nice. So they're larger than I expected. I mean, for a mirrorless camera, both the 50 and the 35 are pretty large. And then they use a 62mm filter thread, which I found unusual. Thankfully, I had an adapter to go up. But 62mm is kind of small. I would say 67 would be a little bit more popular in there. So I was kind of surprised on that. Hey, just a note for all of you video shooters out there, like the second you get these cameras, you got to turn down in-camera sharpening because it is ridiculous how much in-camera sharpening is going on. Current resolution. That's weird. All right, hopefully this bitrate has kind of kicked up a little bit. Yeah, I'm still not seeing a very good feed, which is kind of unfortunate. So let me turn off my devices and maybe that will help. Um, Hopefully you guys are getting like 1080p or something like that. Yeah, for video shooters, please, please, please turn down the sharpening. Man, I recorded some autofocus tests, and it is insane what this camera is out of default. It is just absolutely pumped up sharpening. Do you recommend up to 2 or just 1 camera? Uh, don't ask me. I have way too many cameras out here. I usually recommend having a second camera. Your second camera doesn't need to be as good as your first camera. It depends on how you're using it. You should have 2 cameras. The second one should be at least a backup. I like to shoot with 2 cameras that are the same or very close to the same, so I can have different lenses on different cameras and have them set up a little bit differently. But that's not for everyone. Not everyone needs that ability. So most people, you just need a backup camera in case one fails. You have something else that you can use. That's usually pretty important. Is the Z6 more suitable for wedding photographers than the Z7? I use high resolution cameras for wedding photography. I don't have a problem with it at all. So yeah, we use, right now we use a lot the Sony a7R III for our weddings, and it's 42 megapixels. The files are huge. That doesn't matter as much anymore. Hard drive space is cheap enough that you can pick up a 4 terabyte hard drive for nothing, and most of our working drives are anywhere between 6 and 8. I've got a 40 terabyte drive that all of our stuff is backed up onto, and I don't find it to be nearly as expensive as it was to do something like that. And Lightroom is slow regardless of whether you use a 24 megapixel camera or 40 megapixel camera. It has not made a huge difference to me. So I have no problem shooting high resolution for things like that. Besides the megapixels, what's the biggest difference? I hear that the viewfinders are slightly different in terms of elements. I have not noticed anything much, so I don't know where that's coming from. This is a Z7. I don't find it to be any different than how I was using the Z6. So yeah, apparently there's a little bit of a difference there. Build quality is essentially the same. Features are essentially the same. There's some advantages to the Z6 for video. All right, a lot of questions here. Do the adapters work with Sigma lenses? I don't know, because the adapters are for the Nikon version, and I don't have any Nikon version lenses from Sigma and Tamron. So I have a lot of Sigma and Tamron lenses, but they're all Canon, and so I honestly can't test that right now. I do not, until I get a Nikon version of a Tamron or a Nikon version of a Sigma lens. Yes, the in-camera sharpening, yeah, it's really bad. Turn down the in-camera sharpening. If you've been looking for the 6D Mark II, this is a better camera than that. And in some ways, it's actually a lot better camera than the Canon EOS R. So the Canon EOS R, these are going to be better quality on the image sensor. They also have a little bit faster shooting on them. We should talk cards. And the body, I do like a little bit more. So the Canon grip is really nice. I like the feel of the camera. My pinky fits firmly on the bottom of the grip. So let's talk a little bit about ergonomics. The grip on this thing is very good. I prefer, it's a little bit more rubberized, and I think that helps. So very good on that one. My pinky does kind of slip a little bit off the bottom. So on the Sonys, my pinky is under the camera. It's basically like this. And it's kind of how I hold my phone, actually, where my pinky is doing some support under the camera. I don't know which is better. It's a tough call. Usually my pinky will grip the camera here. It's just really close to that edge. So depending on the size of your hands on that, you might have some issues with your pinky kind of slipping off of that. Another thing is the 2 best function buttons right here that you can program to almost anything are way inside the lens. Depending on the size of your fingers, those can be tough to reach or too easy to press. And then also if you're shooting video, they're essentially useless. So my biggest gripe right now with the ergonomics of this camera is, what the crap is that? These buttons need to be somewhere else. And just because if I'm shooting video, it's essential. I'm not touching the camera like this. I'm not holding the camera. I got the camera on a gimbal, something like that. So these are essentially very useless to me for anything except photo. I usually forget that they're there because they're not there on most other cameras. And then they can be tough to reach depending on how you're holding the camera. If you got your hands up against the grip, you're not touching them all the way. So that's kind of weird. However, they have a function button on the back, this I button, and that brings up a ton of frequently, you can program anything that you want in there. That is amazing. It is absolutely incredible. You can put just about anything else on there. However, the other buttons, which are somewhat programmable on the back of the camera, they're only programmed to very specific things. So like this AF on button, you can't use that for just anything. It has a very select group of stuff. So basically the back of the camera is not very programmable, but the front of the camera, these two function buttons are. There's just so little that you can use those for. Skin tone better than Sony's. That's going to be a big debate. I'm pretty sure that the picture profiles out of this are pretty much identical to the Nikon D850. I don't mind Sony's anymore. I put a video on my Facebook page that you should check out from a guy that's way better than me on any of this stuff, showing the differences between Canon and Sony skin tones and how they compare with each other. I find Sony's to be a great starting point. I don't think that they're a finishing point. I think that Canon is a better finishing point, but sometimes they can be a little yellow for me as a starting point. So it just depends. I edit all of my images, so the Sony's are absolutely fine for me. Is there an option like Sony's to have the zoom cropped in? So you can do an APS-C crop in any mode. However, there's not like, what's it called on the Sony? There's a zoom function. It's a digital zoom. Crap, I use it all the time too, and it's escaping me right now. So you don't have a function like that with the digital zoom to my knowledge. I haven't found it yet, at least. But like I said, I just got the cameras in. Clear image zoom, I think that's it. So that basically is a digital crop, but it's supposed to be only limited to what Sony thinks you can get in before losing a ton of image quality. Technically, you are losing image quality, just maybe not a ton. You can crop in post. So there's really no essential advantage to doing it in there in camera. So I'm not too sure if that's really a missing feature for the most part. You can do an APS-C crop, and I do like the ability to do that. How do you feel about the mirrorless camera lenses from Nikon and Canon? Are Nikon lenses more light and plasticky compared to Canon? They are not plasticky. They are metallic, and they feel decent. The issue is they are big for kind of this intermediate crappy 1.8s. I feel like they're a little bit big for that. And I kind of hope that we had some nicer lenses to show off this cool new lens mount like Canon did with an f2 zoom or 50mm 1.2s. Where is that? So I don't feel like we have pro-end lenses for these cameras despite a $3,500 camera. What do you think about the Blackmagic 4K? I've used the old one. The new one looked really impressive with specs. The last one, you kind of had to do some work, and it was difficult to work with. If you needed the best quality for the price, there was nothing that really came close to that. But there's so many other choices. I don't think that it's probably the best way to go. Tony says the Nikon Z has the, I'm assuming you're talking about Tony Northrop, has the best image quality he's ever seen in any mirrorless camera. And I'm thinking, what more do we want? That's probably true. The Nikon D850 was probably the best image quality of any DSLR. And I'm assuming that this is the same sensor basically that's been used in this camera. The big question is, what kind of lenses are we pairing this with? And that's the big issue for Nikon. So yeah, that image sensor might be great, but you have no f2.8 zooms right now except with adapters, and Sony has an advantage there with that. Do you know Pocket Wizards are compatible? I know Nikon's flash system is compatible with it, so I'm assuming all the Nikon Pocket Wizard stuff should work perfectly. I'll be testing some flash stuff, although it'll probably be Nikon's flash system. Yeah, I would mostly recommend Canon for digital zoom. Not sure what that one is. Sigma lenses work beautifully. That's good to know. Is it good for photography or videography? which one is that? The Z7? There's so many comments, it's hard to keep up. Yeah, I think there's a way to do a comment where your comment shows up a little bit faster, because some of these are getting hard. They're flying by. Is there a grip option for the Z6, Z7? Yeah, I believe so, and I believe I'll have access to them next week. And some people rumored like there was going to be a second card slot in there. I highly doubt it. It's most likely just going to be another battery. Yeah, let's talk about cards. So these use a XQD card. I had none of those cards. I couldn't get one locally. I had to go pretty far away to a Best Buy that had one. That's a big downside to me, is not being able to pick one of these up just anywhere. And also the only one really making decent XQD cards is Sony, which is kind of interesting. So my card readers that Nikon sent me and the cards are all Sony cards. You would think that that's kind of dangerous. I mean, what if Sony decides to stop making these cards anymore? What's Nikon going to do? Because that's really the only reliable card right now for that. Lexar pretty much got out of the game for that, and I think there's a new one, like Delkin or something like that, putting out some cards this month, but I mean, SanDisk isn't an option. It's kind of interesting that they do that. However, they do have one card slot, and probably the most reliable cards on the market right now are these cards. So yeah, you have to have a new card reader. My laptop computer doesn't have, obviously, a reader that will support this, but it does have SD. There are some negatives involved with that. However, these are some of the better cards and faster cards on the market right now. I don't have the grip, so I can't tell you if the grip has a shutter button. Please review the Canon mirrorless camera. I did review the Canon mirrorless camera. You should check it out. It's actually a really good review. We were in Hawaii for a lot of the time. Some really cool portrait shooting elements, so that could be really nice to check out. Canon EOS R review is live. Does the Z6 have a banding issue like the Z7? Well, I can't open up the RAW file yet. I haven't figured out how. Adobe doesn't support it yet, so I haven't found any software that does. Until then, I can't really comment, because you have to push those shadows before you can really tell. Sony is one of the developers of XQD. Yeah, that's so interesting. Why? Why would they do that? I don't quite understand it. I really wish they just had two UHS-2 cards. Let's talk buffer. Here, let's do this. Here's a little live on camera. Let's put the Z6 into a super fast mode. Wait, I'm in video. Okay. I was like, why is that doing? A couple things. So this camera has a bunch of different frame rate options. And basically, if you want to shoot high resolution 14-bit RAW, I believe on the Z6, it's like 5.5 frames per second. They do have a lot of different modes on there, but the buffer on this thing is not great. You start filling this thing up really quick. And I'll show you, let's see if we can hear this. That wasn't too bad, but it wasn't very fast. So that's kind of the issue. Let me go into a little bit faster mode. It does clear really quickly, so that's the good news. So I got about 2 to 3 seconds of shooting on that, and that is in the high speed mode. So it is not incredibly fast, and it is. Is this video going to be I'll probably allow this to go for a couple days so that you can view it. I probably won't keep this up on my channel for very long though, but I'll try and leave it up for a couple days, at least until I have an actual Nikon video out, which should be maybe tomorrow or Monday. I'm going to try and have a thing on here. So subscribe if you're not, and I'll have that out to you guys really soon. Let's do a quick, check this out. All right, Sony A7 III, Nikon Z7, Nikon Z6, Canon EOS R. Sony's definitely the smallest on this. Canon is probably the larger one, and then Nikon is somewhere in the middle on that one. These Canon lenses are absolutely huge. That's a disadvantage. The advantage is that, look at these things. They're beautiful, and they produce excellent image quality, and you have some really wide apertures on this. These are kind of your average mid-grade lenses on this. However, let's talk about this adapter. This is the adapter. I hate this adapter. This is the worst design adapter ever because it has this tripod foot that you cannot remove. guess what? If you try and put tripod plates on this and then try to mount this lens, good luck. It interferes with this. It's almost impossible to change out between your native lens and this lens without having to remove this tripod adapter from your camera. Whether using a video tripod adapter or photo one should be fine because the photo ones are a lot thinner. But using like this Manfrotto or any of these sliding plates with this suck. Come on, Nikon. This is crazy. They need to put out a new adapter for this. Yeah, it's not 12 frames per second. You have to lock everything to get 12 frames per second. This adapter needs to be redesigned without this foot mount. Canon, I don't know where their adapter is, but they have an adapter without this foot mount, and that's the way to go. It's unbelievable. This is the 24-70 f2.8 with the adapter on it, so you can kind of see it gets pretty long with this on there because this lens was already pretty long, and this is actually the non-stabilized, the older one. The newer one is even bigger, and yeah, so these can get very large with that adapter on, which is kind of a negative. Z6 or A7 III? That'll be a great question. I mean, for now, I would say if you're a Nikon shooter and you have full frame lenses, I wouldn't jump ship right yet. I would definitely try this camera, wait out for some reviews. It's not a bad camera at all. It's very, very good. There's a couple little weaknesses on that, but for the most part, you might be able to get around it. The biggest one right now that I'm seeing is the autofocus system, which is a little last generation on the mirror compared to Sony, and doesn't quite compete with what Nikon has on their better DSLRs like the D850, the D500. Those are all going to have better, more reliable, faster autofocus systems on those. Some interesting things right here. What do you prefer, Sony, Nikon, or Canon? You should go check out our channel because we have a video where we compare the A7R III, the Canon 5D4, and the Nikon D850. All three amazing cameras, and kind of looked at some of the differences with quality and speed and sports and different kind of stuff. So just to attach your tripod to the adapter. Okay, so the problem with putting the tripod mount on the adapter is that when I want to go back to a native lens, I can't. So that's the problem, is if you're switching between native lenses and adapted lenses, you're screwed. That's when it's an issue. So you either have to be shooting all native lenses or shooting all adapted lenses, and then you'll be fine. But just give us a removable or no tripod mount. Honestly, I don't understand why you need a tripod mount on the adapter. This is like less than an inch long. Any lens that needs support is going to have a tripod adapter on there. You don't need a tripod mount to support this lens. That's stupid. I don't understand why we have that there. Would anyone who didn't own a previous Nikon with lenses ever get the Z system? It has great image quality. I like the design of many aspects of the camera. There are reasons to like it. There are some big weaknesses with speed, buffer, and autofocus performance. The screen and viewfinder are great, but and a little bit better than what the Sony A7 III is. The build quality also seems better than what the A7 III is. So there's kind of some reasons to look at the A7 III. But the Nikon is not a bad system at all. You just have to see what you need from a camera. I honestly can't see why, and I've shot Nikon for 10 years. Well, so if you're shooting Nikon and you have one of their DSLRs, I love EVFs. I love being able to see my actual exposure on the screen. It is really nice to have that ability, and I highly recommend it. And then you have in-body image stabilization, so all of your lenses are stabilized. That's really nice to have. The video is going to be better than any other Nikon camera. The autofocus in live view is better than any other Nikon camera. The silent shooting operation is better than any other Nikon camera. If you like to shoot time lapses, the Z7 is probably better than any other Nikon camera. So there are reasons to get this camera. There are definitely some limitations, but there are plenty of reasons to like this camera. E7R versus Nikon Z EVF. This EVF is very good. I do find it feels very digitally and over sharpened. It kind of looks like if you go into like a Best Buy and you look at their TVs and you look at that 4K TV from a really cheap brand that's turned up the sharpness all the way, I kind of feel like that's what it looks like. It's clear on the Nikon. It's clear, it's high resolution. It just doesn't look beautiful. I don't know how to put my finger on it yet. So a lot of people asking which one's better. It's hard to tell. It's one of those things that we don't quite know until you've used this camera. Again, guys, check out the description of this video because I have posted, I believe, the low light results. So you can check out a video with the low light test going up to, I think, 12,000 ISO for video. And then photos as well, the JPEGs and RAW files should be there, as well as like my favorite gear for these cameras. So if you're thinking about getting it, all the stuff that you might need, that should be there. Yeah, we're going to see a lot of tests between the A7 III and the Z6 like crazy. Dan, would you recommend on getting a light torch? Every time a new comment comes up, I lose this one. Light torch for wedding receptions or filming and photography. I don't use torch lights. I just use LEDs. I have an aperture LED spotlight that I use for my video work, and then for photos we use just regular flashes usually. I've seen some people use a torch light. It's a stylistic choice more than anything else. It's a spot, and it's a very heavy spot. It's not the most flattering light in the world, so it just kind of depends on the kind of look that you're going for. How are they charging Sony money but can't provide Sony equivalent features? Sony didn't provide Sony equivalent features on their first camera. As someone just commented, I reviewed the very first Sony A7 and they said that I was really harsh on it. Someone just posted that like a day ago. That camera was not good when it first came out, and it had absolutely no lenses. There were like 3 or 4 lenses on it, and they were all not that great. So yeah, it took Sony 3 generations to make it this far, and Nikon is doing it in 1. They definitely jumped the first generation of Sony, but they didn't quite make it to the newest 3rd generation Sony. So it's just interesting to think about. Can I buy an EOS R or a Nikon Z7? Which should you buy? Okay, it's a very hard choice. I would say if you're doing, I did some autofocus tests with this camera in video. It did fairly well, but it did miss occasionally. I will say that it's not as bad as it could have been. It's definitely a step up from like Panasonic GH5s and stuff like that. It's good enough that I would use. However, it did miss a couple times. Every so often, it would go to the background and like the lock on it. So it was good, and it was better than some of those cameras out there, but it's not quite Canon good with the autofocus system. Thankfully, it's not harsh. Like, it's not pulsating in and out and that kind of thing. It just chooses something else to focus on, and it can be difficult to get it back. Now, I was shooting myself, so I wasn't behind the camera, so I might have been able to just tap on the touchscreen and select me, and it might have followed me around a little bit better. So it's very hard to say. Can a software update fix Nikon issues? Autofocus systems sometimes get better over time with autofocus updates. It's not a night and day difference ever that I have seen it. In fact, Panasonic's GH5, they tried to fix it because it was so bad that it was unusable, and they had talked about how good it was for video, and the autofocus system was unusable. They put out a firmware update that was supposed to help. It never quite got good. So I've seen people update their firmware in order to try and get better performance from autofocus and stuff like that. So it hasn't quite gotten from like bad to great or anything like that. You can usually see just a little bit better. Have you ever a photo or video for a wedding of a couple or relative? We shoot weddings all the time. We shoot photography and videography for weddings. We have one next week. Sally and I both shoot. I'm shooting video for this one. She's shooting photos for, actually, they're 2 separate weddings that we're shooting at. We have a behind the scenes of a wedding that I videoed Sally shooting behind the scenes photography, and she was using Sony cameras on that one. So you can go check that out. It's pretty recent. It's done really well as well. Can I use stabilization with video on Canon? So there's no in-body image stabilization on Canon. That is something that Nikon does have, is image stabilization on it, and it seems to work pretty well. In video, I was hand holding a 50mm, and it was somewhat usable. Oh, someone asked in the forums about rolling shutter. Rolling shutter is definitely there. It is not one of the better cameras on the market, but it is not one of the worst. The readout speeds in this camera are not anything to write home about, so I didn't really expect it to be amazing. It will be there, but certainly if you're shooting in controlled environments and you're not doing like whip pans, or you're not hand holding an 85 or things like that, it's not uncomfortably bad. Also, the image stabilization does help quite a bit. The behind the scenes are cool, by the way. Thank you very much, Reagan. Appreciate that. What is a firmware version of a Z6? That's a great question. Let me see if I can check that. I have no idea where it would be in here. I'm guessing settings, firmware version, information display. No, firmware version 1.0.1.00. So literally the first, but should still work, right? Let's see, the original EOS M had a firmware update that improved the autofocus from unusable to bad. I have the EOS M, the original one. My daughter uses it all the time. I think it's fine. I had no issues with that camera. I don't know why it got such a bad rap. I did have a firmware update on the autofocus, which made things better. I bought it after that firmware update. I didn't have crazy expectations of shooting sports with it. It's a tiny pocket camera, so maybe that was the difference on it. But I had no issues with it. Let's see, something on the stabilization. If you use a stabilization with these native lenses, it is 5-axis image stabilization. If you use a stabilization with the adapters, it is 3-axis image stabilization. So definitely keep that in mind. Let's see. How is it that Nikon didn't learn from Sony in their earlier models? There's a little bit of a difference between Nikon and Sony on this one. Sony really only has their mirrorless cameras. Like, nobody knows what Sony is doing with their A99s and things like that. So really they only have their mirrorless cameras. So they have to their mirrorless cameras have to be good as any Nikon camera. Nikon doesn't have to do that because they still have their D850 and everybody still loves their D850. It's really hard to find one in stock, and the D5s and things like that. So Nikon and Canon, they don't have to compete with Sony in that. They can basically say that their DSLRs are the competition for the A7R III, and that's how you should shoot that. Their mirrorless cameras they can phase as something different. So Sony has to give it all on their mirrorless lines. Do they have a Sony image sensors? Most likely. Sony makes image sensors for almost everyone, including Nikon, and most of the better Nikon image sensors are made from Sony. I think Toshiba's made a couple of them, but Nikon doesn't make their own, so the better ones come from Sony. I'm sure they have their own processing involved, so things look different, colors look different, overall quality looks different, but they typically do. There aren't many bad cameras left. That's very true. There are just cameras. So a lot of people commented that on the EOS M because we were a little bit harsh on some of the aspects of that camera. So it is not a bad camera. In fact, almost any camera is good. Right above me, I have a Panasonic G7, and I use that as my overhead camera. I bought that camera for $500, and I shot weddings with it. It was great. Yes, almost every camera can be used and take great video quality, image quality, whatever. Your phones do really well this day. What we're looking for is justification for the price. So if you're paying $2,500 for this Sony or Canon EOS R, does that make sense to buy that over another camera? And then some of these features can make a big difference in the kind of things you can shoot, what your ISO will be at. If I have in-camera image stabilization, I can shoot details at a wedding with an 85 1.4 at like ISO 200. That was never possible because I can hand hold a 40th of a second. That's not possible from other cameras. So there are definitely some really cool things that you should consider on that one. All right, I might be wrapping this up soon, just to let you know. So if you have any other questions out there or want to mention anything else, now is a good time. Low light performance of the Z6 and A7 III. They're going to be very similar, most likely. They use very similar image sensors. I don't expect a massive difference. If anything, you're going to see like a third of a stop, but in the real world, I don't think it's going to be a major difference. How do you think a Z6 is going to stack up for wedding photography? Are you worried about the one card slot? I am worried about the one card slot, and not just for backup. We shoot weddings and we shoot dual card slots, and we do this for many reasons. One is backup. We have lost cards before, so that is a negative. But the other thing is I always like having two cards in the camera, because you never know when you're going to need that second card, whether you need to borrow someone else's camera because your camera died and you can just throw that card into their camera and have all of your original images still preserved, or you just need overflow, and there's no safer place to keep your card than your camera. The other thing is that we usually bring on second shooters a lot to our weddings, and so what we do is we put one of our cards in their camera with two card slots, and then they have one of their cards in their camera with two card slots. And so they can go home at the end of the day with images from the wedding that they can use, and we go home with all of our images on the other one. So not only does it serve as redundancy, but there are just a lot of other reasons for it. Sometimes we like to share an image from the wedding day. We'll edit it like during the reception, or if there's a downtime, sometimes I'll have an hour or two break, and we will use that time, pull one card from the camera, edit a couple pictures on that, and then move that card out. We still have the original card in the camera, and that is less risk. So there are a ton of reasons of using two card slots. If you know Jordan Drake, he was at the Camera Store TV, he's now at DP Review. He just posted on his Instagram that he actually dropped a card and it fell between the slots of like a dock or something like that, and he lost that card with all of his video and images. Crap happens. You wouldn't think about those kind of things, but yes, if you pull one of your cards from that card is now vulnerable to anything. You could drop it, step on it, fall in, whatever it is. However, I do think that XQD cards are probably the most reliable cards on the market, so backup is probably a little bit less of a concern than they would be with JPEG. I kind of automatic backup via Wi-Fi. I shoot dual RAW. You don't want to dual RAW backup. Also, I don't think the workflow is great. It drains the camera battery. It drains the phone battery. Every time you change batteries, you probably have to reset up that system, that link. I don't think it works really well for weddings. It might be fine for a portrait shoot or something like that. I don't think it works very well. And then, like I said, there's so many other reasons. Like you drop the card corrupts while you're putting into a computer. It gets lost at some point. If you're traveling, as soon as we finish the wedding, I like to take one card, put it on my person, keep the other one on the camera. If my gear got stolen, I have some of those images. Sometimes after like the wedding ceremony, we will pull one card from the camera and put in another card and just keep that one separate into somewhere safer if we're concerned at all. So there's just a lot of things that you might want dual cards for. And I'm very surprised that they didn't put dual cards in the 7. I kind of expected the Z6 to have one card slot, but they put it in the D500 as dual card slots, the D750 is dual card slot, even the D600 I believe had dual card slots. So Nikon uses dual card slots. I don't know why they're separating these mirrorless cameras as if they don't need dual card slots. Any other camera you think is better than the Z7? The Sony a7R III or DSLRs are probably going to be the cameras I would think of, and it just depends on what's most important to you. When it comes to autofocus performance, the Z7 is not going to compete with like a Nikon D850 for autofocus performance, or the Sony a7 III or a7R III. So that's kind of the main reason. The A9 compares more to the D5, at least for me. In terms of speed, the A9 is a very special camera. It's almost like a specialty camera. It is not the greatest camera for anything except shooting electronic shutter. For everything else, you can buy a better camera than the A9. But if you're shooting electronic shutter, it is amazing because guess what? You can shoot 20 frames per second and you can shoot with almost no issues with things like rolling shutter. It is the only camera that can do that. So if you want to shoot electronic shutter, either because you need the speeds of 20 frames per second or you want silent shooting, that A9 is just completely unbeatable on that one. What camera do you think is the best value from a beginner? If you're talking under $1,000, the best value of a camera right now is the T7i. And if you need to go below that, the SL2 or 77D, those are very similar cameras. And if you can find, sometimes the 77D is actually so close in price to T7i, it's like $50 difference. So, yeah, the T7i, Canon T7i is probably one of the best beginner cameras out there. Nikon's D5500, I'm not a huge fan of, just mostly because the live view autofocus is crap. And I think that people in those beginner markets are using live view way too much to have crappy autofocus performance in that one. Olympus EM1. I don't have any of the Olympus cameras. I had that camera a while back and I was supposed to do a review on it, and I shot a lot of footage on it and I never finished the review on it. I don't think there's much reason to shoot Olympus. I'm not a huge fan of Micro Four Thirds for anything except video. I just don't think so. I think for photos, a sensor, image sensor size matters, and you should really step up to that. And unless you just need a 400mm lens that's smaller, I don't think there's any reason to get Micro Four Thirds. I know there's some good qualities to them, but it's just not me. Z6 or D750, I would get the Z6. The D750, if it got updated, I might say the D750, but the D750 is a little old now and needs some upgrades, especially when it comes to, if you shoot video or live view, get the Z6. What's your best vlogging lens for the Canon 60 Mark II? That's a tough choice. I have this new lens from Tamron. It's a 17 to 35, f2.8 to f4. The only problem with it is it's not stabilized. Tamron has a f2.8 constant that is like a 16 to 35. It's like $1,200 though, but it's cheaper than anything Canon has. And that one is stabilized because you really need stabilization with that camera. So that's kind of an interesting one. Do you spend more time on the Z6 skin tone than the A7 III? I don't think I spend any more time on either one. I think you're just moving the sliders in different directions, but I'm pretty much adjusting all the same sliders. So to me, it's not more work, it's just a different workflow, but neither one of them I'm using the colors in camera. And even on Canon, I'm not using the cameras in camera. They come out more pleasing to my eye, but I'm not spending any more time with the Sony to get them right. I'm just adding different colors when I adjust my curves. Is there 4K video? Does it crop in when recording video? There is 4K video. It will use the full resolution of the sensor, full sensor on the Z6. If you want it on the Z7, it will also shoot 4K video with the full sensor. However, it is a little lower quality. To get the highest resolution or highest quality in video in 4K on the Z7, you need to crop. Also, there's a crop in 1080p at 120 frames per second. I do not believe there is a crop on the Z6 when you shoot 120, but I'm going to try and verify that. Yeah, it doesn't look like there is a crop at all when I go into... Oh yeah, there is. Yes, there is. So the Nikon... Oh, this is the Z7. The Z7 does have a crop. This is the Nikon Z6. So that was a fun little error right there. All right, let's see. The Z6, if I am in, which I am in right now, full frame mode. Unfortunately, I don't have the menus set up on this camera like I want. But yeah, I do not believe there is a crop for video on this. Does not look like there is a crop when you're going into 1080p. Yeah, looks the same to me. Let me make sure I'm in full frame mode. So there is no crop on 1080p at 120 frames per second on the Z6. There is for the Z7. Z6 with a 24-70 zoom or the 35mm prime. This is a tough one for me, and one of the reasons that I'm not a huge fan of what Nikon is doing here with their lenses that they put out, because f4 is just not good enough for me. I feel like you're almost better off with a APS-C camera and an f2.8 lens than a full frame camera with an f4. Really not seeing justification of going full frame unless you're going f2.8 lenses. So in that case, I kind of say the prime lens. However, I usually recommend people get a zoom first and then add your prime lenses after that, because what you'll do is you'll see your zoom where you take your pictures. So after you've used a 24-70 for a long time, go look at your favorite images and see if they're at 50 millimeters or 70 or 24 or 35, and then you'll know, because if you're shooting all of your best images at 70 mil, then you might want a 50 or an 85, and if you're using all of your best images at 35, then you'll know exactly what you're looking for. So I like kind of starting out with a zoom and then working from there. An update with Tamron compatibility. Someone mentioned that Tamron and Sigma lenses seem to work fine with the Nikon cameras. I have not tested this personally because all of my Sigma and Tamron lenses are, which I have a bunch of Sigma and Tamron lenses, but they're all Canon mount. I don't have any Nikon mounts. I have a T3i with a 50mm and 10-18 lens. I want to get a better camera for vlogging. Should I get the 80D or the 6D Mark II? Neither. How about that one? You should either get the 77D, which is going to be an improvement from the T3i, or the EOS R, but that's a little bit of a tough choice. I don't think I would go full frame right now on Canon for that. There is not a huge advantage to the 6D Mark II for vlogging versus something like the 77D. You'd be better off buying a 77D and getting nice, good lenses, wide aperture lenses. I would go that route. Save money on camera, get some glass. So if you weren't ready to do this video on Nikon cameras, I guess that was a negative comment right there. This is the very first day with the camera. I'm trying to answer as many questions as I can. And then if I don't know the answers to these, this video is designed to tell me what I need to do going forward. None of the Tamron lenses worked with the Z7. All of my Sigma lenses do with the Z7. Wow, interesting. Okay. I did talk to Tamron a little bit at the Photo Plus event. They didn't mention anything about compatibility. All right, so I think that's going to wrap it up here. I think we've gone 1 hour, which is, wow, that's actually more than I thought we would go for. So definitely check out the description because I have my favorite gear for the Nikon Z6, Z7. I also have some low light tests, and then sub because I'm going to have a new video coming out probably tomorrow with hands-on where you can actually see the results of this. Problem with a live show is I can't show you, so I did some autofocus testing and low light testing, but I can't show it to you, so I'm kind of talking and yeah, I'm hoping that you believe me, but we're gonna have more tests. Obviously I have these cameras now, got them in yesterday, and so all of that is coming really soon. Must we just wait for the Z9? It is very interesting. I don't know if we're gonna see a Z9. With what Nikon and Canon have shown with these is that they're not trying to compete with their DSLRs. They're trying to not compete with their DSLRs and offer something different. So I can't see why we would see a Z9 versus a D5. Honestly. What is your opinion of the possibility of Nikon introducing 1.2 glass? Nikon has actually released pretty much their entire roadmap, and I didn't see any 2.8 or 1.2 lenses on there. We have that f.95 lens that no one is going to get because it's like $5-6 grand. It's huge. It's a manual focus only. I don't know. This is Nikon's biggest mistake, I think, is their lenses. They introduced these. They have no pro version lenses on here, what I would call pro version lenses to compete with Canon and Sony, but have a $3,500 camera. Everything mandates the adapter to get anything decent, and then the roadmap is really not showing off this brand new lens map, or this lens mount, except for this f.95 lens, which is unrealistic and kind of stupid. So I don't know, Nikon, you should have released some f1.4, f1.2 lenses, done something cool with an f2 zoom. Sigma has f2 zooms for these cameras. Canon has f2 zooms now for their mirrorless cameras. I don't know why Nikon didn't show off. So I don't think that these lenses are showing off for Nikon. I think these are just normal, average, good lenses, and they're kind of average pricing on that. So I don't know. Please test the Z6 more. Yeah, everyone is like, you're literally, no one has the Z6 yet. It is not for sale. There's a couple of us who got an early copy, so you're gonna start seeing them coming up soon. Probably next week. We have a bunch of shoots with a couple of people who have Z6s coming up next week. They do have a 51.2 on the roadmap. Oh, that's good. Okay, awesome. I missed that one or forgot about it. So that's good. I want to see that. I want to see that kind of stuff soon. Again, it's not like it makes much of a difference. 1/3 of a stop is almost irrelevant in most cases, but I want to see them showing off. I want to see them showing better quality across the entire lens. So like this lens at f1.2, this Canon 50mm 1.2, I can shoot it at 1.2 all day long. It is sharp. It is perfectly sharp and perfectly usable. So this is a very, very good lens, even at 1.2. So if they put out a 1.2, what I'm looking for is not just the fact that you can do it, because I don't really care about that 1/3 stop. What I'm looking for is a 1.2 lens that's usable at f1.2. Canon has released f1.2 lenses in the past. They were okay at 1.2 at best. Nikon has been limited to 1.4 lenses because of their lens mount. I want to see some differences there. So, okay, that's it, guys. Feel free to comment in the video below. I'll be checking this. Ask me your questions on what you want to test. Follow me on anything I'm going to be posting on Instagram. If you want to go to my Instagram channel, it's @learningcameras. You can follow me there. I'll have some things on my stories and I'm testing. So that's going to be a really cool thing. Look for some comparisons with the Canon EOS R. Look for some comparisons with the Sony A7 III. We actually just shot a comparison with the EOS R and the Z7 and the A7R III. Did I say all that? Yeah, so that is coming up. I have to edit that, which could take a little while, but that is all coming up. So thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I'll see you very soon, and stay tuned for some really cool stuff with this camera.